Everybody sort of let's calm down for a sec. Um, happy New Year. I can't see the screen, Tia. How do we move this? Tia, how do we move this around? Can we move this? Oh, okay. All right, cool. Okay, all right, cool. All right, we're good. Welcome, everybody. There is our speakers today will be here momentarily. With those of you, when you see these animals come in, they're going to be some service animals, and they're able to be petted, and they're going to be part of the presentation. I just wanted everybody to know. So if you're allergic to animals, just don't touch them, but they'll be around. You can pet them. Just wanted you all to know. Welcome, everybody. I want to do a moment of silence for the people that lost their lives in Las Vegas, as well as New Orleans this New Year's. So everybody just take a moment. Okay, let's continue. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome, and thank you, Chris. Mike Newman, Steve Day, Chris Bradford, Ed, Tia is not for Steve. Who's Ed's iPhone? Who is that? Who? Ed Jackson. Hi. So everybody, welcome that are Zooming. Good to see you. Happy New Year, everybody. And like we've gone over the last 6 months, our theme is the magic of Rotary. Hello, Val. There's some chairs right here. I want to thank a special greeting for Nancy Cohen, who's the greeter. Everybody, let's give Nancy a round of applause. By the way, let's make Jim Crane's year a special one. If he asks you to step up, please say yes, because this is about service. Yes, Terry. What's going on? I think it's Melissa. I believe.
Can you move the screen? No, wait. So we can see.
It's me.
No.
It's me. It's me. Okay. Janet, it is, everybody stand up. We're going to recite the pledge. What you wrote? To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Fantastic. Well, the thought of the day was supposed to be given by Steve Day. Steve, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm ready. Sorry I can't be there in person today. First, happy New Year to everybody. It's that season again of resolutions, which are always easier to break than to keep. But I got a list here of the top 10 resolutions this year. Exercise more, lose weight, get organized, learn a new skill or hobby, live life to the fullest, save more money, spend less money, quit smoking, spend more time with family, friends, and fellow Rotarians, travel more, and read more. So as I said, they're harder to keep than to break. So if you've made your resolutions, work hard to keep them. And of course, now that it's a new year, I think it'd be appropriate to have an Irish proverb for the new year. And I'm going to try to do it with my best Irish accent. Here we go. May your troubles be less and your blessings be more, and nothing but happiness come through the door. I am done, President Ben.
And by the way, thank you so much for. Oh, I think we have our guests here. Come on in. You see people with dogs. Let's welcome them. We have cheer for you right here. By the way, for those who are missing this presentation, you will see a couple of nice dogs that are going to be walking around here. Hello. Okay. Thank you, past President Steve, for your thought of the day. And the song of the day. Do the dogs freak out with a voice song?
No.
No. Okay. Just want to make sure. Come on. All right. Come on. We'll go through the business and then we'll talk.
I'm sure there's nobody to allergic to dogs.
Anybody allergic to dogs? Besides those that are on the anybody in this room? Okay.
I hate dogs.
Okay. The song of the day will be Ed Go.
Stand for the song. All like God. And let me put my hand like God on the beat.
Oh. Now that's good.
Oh,
The great before God and the cross. The greatness before God and all. Oh, son, my dear. Oh, son, will take a cup of kindness yet. Oh, son. By the way, thank you, Mark Rogo, for being the windmill, doing the windmill in advance. Visiting Rotarians. Well, I'm going to introduce Susan.
Yes.
No, this my wife, Susan. I want to introduce the First Lady, Susan Taylor. Okay. Thank you for coming, Susan. Any other guests of Rotarians that are here? We do have somebody, Melissa, who is wanting to be part of this club, is on Zoom. So she was at least before. So what? She had to leave early? Okay, so she's not on the Zoom, but she has an interest. We're going to introduce you just after this, okay? Um, and I have a couple of announcements. Very important announcement. We are having a district breakfast, and it's 9:30 at the Beverly Garland Hotel in North Hollywood. Now, as I've said before, these are important. We'd like to get a table. I will tell Terry that if you register and you send a bill to Terry, we will pay it for this breakfast, okay? And I'm encouraging everybody to be there. How many people are free on the 25th that could be at this breakfast? Raise your hand. 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. I don't see anybody in the background. So maybe Steve, we can get Steve to go. Another one, perfect. So that's good. So make sure we get the registration on the 5280 website, and then from there, and maybe we can carpool together, going to North Hollywood. Okay, today's program. Which one is Susan? Susan Hoffman, Allison Higgins, and Sheila Pappas, right? Are from the Guide Dogs of America. Let's give them a round of applause. Now, how do I just press it? Okay, we're going to show the YouTube video first. Okay. Wow, that's a great entree. Those of you who are on Zoom, you're not going to be able to get the full flavor of this. See, sometimes when you come in person, you get a different experience. Just, I know, Chris, you can't be here, but Mike Newman, Steve Shearer, Steve Day, I know you can't, and Ed. The dogs are here for us to have fun with, I guess. And without further ado, Sheila? Susan, come on in, and speak is yours.
I taught university for like years. I've never used a mic in my whole life. So if I'm too loud or not loud enough, let me know. I also know that several of you are over 30 and probably don't hear as well as you used to. So feel free to tell me to speak up. As you know, we're from Guide Dogs of America. The formal name of the organization is Guide Dogs of America Tender Loving Canines. I'm going to refer to it as GDA because it'll take up the whole speaking time if I say the whole name the whole time. I'm going to start with the end and tell you where these dogs will end up if they're successful. And then I'll go back to the beginning and tell you how they get to where it's at. The dogs that are raised by GDA can end up in several different sort of tracks. Right now, they're like kids in elementary school who are smart. They have a lot of potential, but we don't yet know what their final career is going to be. But their careers could be a guide dog for a blind person, an assistance dog or a service dog for a child with autism, a service dog for a veteran who has PTSD, or they could be what's called a facility dog, which is they work in a courtroom or some kind of facility where people have, where it's emotionally trying for people, and the dog can calm people down and keep order in the room. So that's the goal. When they start off, for the most part, they're born at the Guide Dogs of America campus in Sylmar. The campus looks a lot like a college campus. It's got a nursery and a vet office and classrooms and dormitories. And they do run tours if you're interested in seeing it. They do have tours every day. And I'm going to give out information later that'll tell you, how you can go on a tour, how you can help if you want to help. But for the most part, they're born there. I say for the most part because in order to avoid having, all the dogs with the same genetic background, the service dog schools all over Canada and the United States exchange puppies with each other. So these two were both born at Guide Dogs of America, but we do have a few that were born elsewhere. For the first 8 months, first 8 weeks of their life, they live up at the Guide Dog campus. The first 5 weeks, usually with their mother, 4 or 5 weeks, depending on the litter. The parents of these dogs are dogs who were trained to be service dogs and showed that they had the potential to do it, but were then branched off and made into breeders instead. So they're what we call purpose-bred dogs. They're bred for temperament and intelligence and willingness to work. And the willingness to work is a big thing because these dogs are raised entirely with positive reinforcement, with praise and treats. No dog is ever forced to do anything they don't want to do. And that's an important thing because as you're going to hear, a lot of what they do is not what most dogs do. Like you can't chase squirrels or stuff like that. And so I want to emphasize that only the dogs that want to do it. And as a result of that, even though they're purpose-bred and they're all trained very carefully, only about half of them actually make it as service dogs. So for the first 8 weeks while they're at GDA, we have what's called a Head Start program. It's what you would think it is. It's a way where little puppies get used to walking on different surfaces, being held by different people, listening to different noises. So by the time they go to families at 8 weeks of age, they're kind of used to being out in the world as opposed to just being with their mother. We do keep the litters together, so they're with their litter mates. At that point, they go to puppy raisers when they're 8 weeks old. Anybody, almost anybody, can be a puppy raiser, and it's something for people who retire. It's a wonderful thing to do. The only requirement is that you're able to spend time with the dog. The dog can't be left alone. We have people who take dogs to work, people who take dogs to school, and people who are home with the dogs. You can live in an apartment, you can live anywhere that a dog is allowed. For the most part, even if a dog isn't allowed, often the landlord will allow these dogs because they're service dogs in training. The puppy raiser gets to keep this adorable little puppy. They pick it up at 8 weeks of age, what we call puppy pickup day. And they raise the puppy until it's 18 months old, approximately. They take the puppies through a GDA program called Puppy Kindergarten, where both the puppy raiser and the dog are trained in the basics of sit, come, stay, all the standard, sort of obedience stuff that dogs learn. So you don't have to know anything about training dogs ahead of time if you want to be a puppy raiser. And it actually is great because if you have other dogs too, you learn how to train all your dogs. The main job of the puppy raiser, other than teaching basic obedience, is to get the dogs out in the world and used to going all kinds of places that, say, a blind person might want to take a dog. So these dogs go to supermarkets and movies and funerals and weddings. And one of the big jobs of a puppy raiser is to come up with creative places to take the dog. And for me, at least, I was retired when I started doing it. I've raised several of these puppies. I'm actually between puppies right now. Alice and Sheila are jointly raising Winter. And that's Zizu, who actually is being raised by a different puppy raiser, but we borrowed her for this. And that's something we do. We exchange dogs and breed in different places. Because the whole idea is by the time the dog goes to work, the dog should know how to behave in public and should be used to different people, people of different races, people with canes, people on crutches, wheelchairs, all that stuff. Another benefit of being a puppy raiser, and I'm pushing this because I really think, once you're sort of not working anymore, this is a great thing to do, is it's a wonderful community of people. People who raise puppies are all good, kind people, and we all become very close. It's like having an extra family. So the puppy raisers get together and do a lot of things together, often go to museums together with their dogs, anything they can come up with. And people come up with some pretty creative things. Anyway, this whole time they're being monitored by employees who are professional dog trainers up at Guide Dogs of America, who are sort of supervising the training and helping with problems and getting to know the dogs. When the dogs are about 18 months old, they go into what we call college. There's a big puppy turn-in day where everybody has to bring their puppy back up to GDA and everybody cries and it's sad and there's lots of hugging. But everybody's also really happy because if your puppy has made it to college, that's a big deal because some puppies don't even make it that far. Some puppies, it's clear they're not cut out for this and they get dropped before that. Once the puppies go to college, that's when they get divided into two different tracks. And the track, sort of where the puppy goes, is kind of dependent on an evaluation of their personality and what they're good at and not good at, because I'm going to sort of describe to you what's required for the different jobs. The original function of Guide Dogs in America, obviously, was to raise guide dogs for blind people. And so probably about half of the dogs stay at the Guide Dogs of America campus, and they're trained there to be guide dogs. The puppy raisers don't train them to be guide dogs. The puppy raisers just train them to be good dogs out in the world. The trainers who train the guide dogs are they used to be specially licensed in California. They're no longer licensed, but they're required to do a 3-year apprentice program. And the apprentices work with the dogs, obviously, and then they're taught the technical part of being a guide dog, how to follow instructions, how to follow a curb, how to avoid obstacles. One of the most magic things that I've never understood is that they're taught to warn their eventual owner if anyone's going to hit their head on something. And how to teach a dog that is beyond me. The other kind of magic thing they're taught is intelligent disobedience, which means that they learn that if they're given a command by the blind person, which would put the blind person in danger, like if the blind person tells them to cross the street, they will disobey. And that's a very hard thing to teach a dog. You have to obey most of the time, but sometimes you have to not obey. So that program tends to take at least 6 months in college and sometimes a little more than that. Okay, and then I'm going to come back to what happens next with those dogs, because I want to tell you about the other track, which in some ways is more interesting, I think. The dogs that aren't going to the guide dog zone go to what we call the service dog zone. Now, guide dogs are also service dogs, so it's a little bit weird, but it's just how we differentiate. The service dog side, the dogs are trained in men's prisons by inmates. And that's a phenomenal program. In order to be able to train a dog, or an inmate to be able to train a dog, that inmate has to have a really good behavioral record, no infractions, nothing bad. They have to apply, they have to be chosen. And it's a very desirable program for inmates because they get to live in a different place than the other inmates. They have a whole different schedule. and they get a dog assigned to them. And you probably know that for prisons have traditionally been like revolving doors. What people used to say is, if you go to prison, what you learn to do is be a better criminal because you're with criminals. The recidivism rate for the inmates who train the dogs is 0. We've never had somebody who trained a dog in prison end up back in prison for committing another crime. And that's for a number of reasons. We all, we get to know some of these inmates when they finally get out of prison. So we have a little bit of, sort of personal information. For a lot of these inmates, it's the first time they've ever had a loving relationship with anything. It's the first time they've ever been responsible. In the inmate community in general, everybody's told what to do, exactly when, and that's not really good training for getting out of the world later. They're not given an opportunity to mature and learn. But the prisoners who are in this program, training these dogs, are given a lot of responsibility, a lot of freedom, and they're taught a skill, which is how to train a dog. There's a lot of inmates that try and get into the program. Only a small number can be chosen for it. And if they do anything wrong, they're kicked out of the program. So it's a very big incentive for the inmates, and it's been very, very successful. That program was part of a merger. Originally, Guide Dogs of America just trained guide dogs. And then we merged with a program called Tender Loving Canines that raised the dogs for autism, for people with PTSD, and for the dogs in various kinds of centers. That program has just sort of astonished all of us. I know I was raising a puppy when we did the merger. My thought was, no way is my puppy going to a men's prison. I don't have a man in the house. I was raising that particular puppy during COVID, so she didn't have much experience with men. And I was like, no way. I thought hard to get her into the guide dog side. Now that I've been more educated and I understand the value of that prison program and how nice the facilities are for the prisoners in that program and how much the dogs are loved and how well they're treated, I feel completely different about it. And I think we've all gone through that transition. The dogs are trained very differently. It took me quite a while to understand sort of the real difference. And the real difference is the dogs who are trained to be guide dogs are trained to watch where they're going, ignore distractions, ignore other people, just be totally focused on their person, on the obstacles in advance, ahead of them, on the traffic. They have to be very focused. The dogs on the service dog program that go with autistic kids or people with PTSD have a sort of different job. They're helping people to get out in the world who would otherwise have difficulty doing it. A lot of the people with PTSD have had horrible traumas. They get very nervous out in public. Obviously, a lot of kids with autism have, meltdowns in public. Or those dogs are trained, although they're trained to be very obedient and very good in public, they're also trained to be very social. And one of the big, particularly for autistic kids, if you see an autistic kid out in the world, and if your child sees an autistic kid out in the world, the tendency is to look away, not to try and be friends. And so autistic kids are not only born with a problem in being socialized, they also don't get the same experience as being socialized that most kids do. And so it's a double whammy. But if a kid has a dog like this, all of a sudden, everybody wants to be friends with that dog. Everybody wants to talk to them. But the parent is the one that's trained to be responsible for the dog. And if it's a person with autism, they use a particular kind of leash. It's got 2 handles on it, a higher handle for the parent and a lower handle for the child. So the child walks holding on to the dog, and the parent is there, to make sure everything's going well. And it changes kids completely. kids that could never go out in public and never have friends. All of a sudden, the dog, is their best friend. The dog is their introduction to the world. And the dogs are taught specific things. They're taught a command called swish. And this works both for autistic kids and surprisingly adults with PTSD. Swish is just the dog lies on top of their legs when the person, kid is seated and puts a little pressure there. And it's a very calming thing. They also learn sort of things that attract people. Guide dogs aren't taught tricks. They're kind of the serious side. But the dogs that are going to be service dogs are taught to wave. They're taught to do high five. And they're also taught a lot of sort of useful skills in case they're with somebody who has physical limitations. So they're taught to open a cupboard or a refrigerator. They're taught to press the button for a handicapped person to get into a building if the person's in a wheelchair. That program, because those dogs are taught so many different commands, takes almost a year for the most part. And one of the reasons it is right now, each of those dogs could end up being with a person with PTSD or a person with autism or a facility dog. They're talking about maybe trying to, divide the dogs up more early so that the training could be shorter. But right now, that's just something, they're talking about. The training is always changing. The service dog schools around the country all exchange information about what works and what doesn't work. And the way the dogs are trained evolves greatly over time. So it's hard to say this is exactly what we do. When I first joined Guide Dogs in America, which was 9 years ago, we used to do corrections. If the dog was sort of pulling somewhere they weren't supposed to go, we would give them not punishment, but a sharp jerk on the chain. Now there's no corrections anymore at all. They found that they want the dogs to want to work. And so the training has to be fun. And so there's no punishment. The absolutely worst thing that ever happens to a dog who's, overexcited and out of control is they might get what we call a timeout, which is basically a few minutes of not being paid attention to. They're all trained to sleep in crates. The crate is never used as a punishment. It's supposed to be a place where the dogs like to go. All of us have to keep the dogs in crates at night. When somebody ultimately gets the dog for keeps, it's up to them, whether they want the dog to sleep in a crate or not. Okay, so that's the training. And I tried to summarize. If you have questions about it.
Good question.
Yeah.
Can they walk around with the dogs?
Sure. Nobody's going to listen to me, So I'm going to guess.
It's all garbage and park. How do you get the dog to park?
Well, that's a hard one. They get rewarded when they're quiet and maybe ignored a little bit when they're barking. But if the problem's not fixable, the dog won't find the program. My personal dog's bark, and I've totally given up because actually I like having a guard dog, so they bark on the property. Okay, let me sum up here because I know nobody's listening. Once the dogs are ready to graduate,
Listen, everybody, just so that I know the dogs are great.
all the dogs go back to Guide Dogs of America. The Guide Dogs are already there. The service dogs come back. And they have a graduation, which is sort of like a college graduation. The public is invited. The puppy raisers are invited. The people who are getting the dogs actually spend time living on campus before they graduate. The people who are blind and getting a guide dog live on the campus for 3 weeks. People who are getting a service dog tend to live there for about 10 days. And if it's an autistic child, it's the parent who lives there. Guide Dogs in America is a charity. We get no government assistance. The dogs are provided to people free of charge. and everything is covered. So if a blind person stays at Guide Dogs of America for 3 weeks, they get their full room and board and training and everything free of charge. So we depend entirely on contributions and on volunteers. Anyway, once you have the graduation ceremony, the puppy raiser goes up on the stage and the graduating person goes up on the stage. And they've all met each other ahead of time. Each person who's graduating tells, gives a little speech about what the dog means to them. The puppy raiser probably tells a few little funny things about what the puppy was like as puppy. They always project pictures of the dogs, of little puppies. It's another very sad situation, because once you know your dog is graduating, you know the dog's not coming back to you. As long as the dog's in training, they might get dropped. If they get dropped, the puppy raiser has an option whether to keep that dog or not. Once the dogs go to their hopefully permanent homes, they belong to Guide Dogs of America for the first year. The Guide Dogs monitors them to make sure the dog's well taken care of. Often the people need extra training, so somebody from Guide Dogs of America flies out there. One of my puppies, poor little thing, was raised in Southern California, and they sent her to Minnesota this winters and on record. And she got very confused by all the ice and snow. And so a trainer went out and worked with her new owner to help the guide dog learn to guide, and they couldn't see clearly where things were. So, but then after the first year, it becomes that person's dog, and they want the dog on the furniture, that's fine. They want the dog in the bed, that's fine. They make the rules from then on. It's up to the person who gets the dog to decide whether they want to stay in touch with the puppy raiser. Of course, we all want to know forever how the dogs are doing, and we all want pictures and stuff, but it's up to the other person to decide. I think all of us have been fortunate in that we've stayed in touch with the people who have our dogs. And there's something so gratifying about seeing that crazy little puppy that you raised out in the public, guiding a blind person and keeping them safe. And these dogs are so loved because they get to go everywhere with the person. They're not left at home. It's a full tight bond. And for a lot of people who get these dogs, it's the closest friend they have. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I know a woman who has a guide. What I didn't understand, now I'm just curious. She comes to a light. Who decides when to go on the green light?
This is a little bit of a complicated question.
Okay.
And I'm going to answer it. In some places, like in Canada, the traffic lights make noise. So the blind person can tell when the light is changing. And it's starting to do that in the United States, but it's still very rare. Obviously, in that situation, the blind person can tell and gives the dog a command. Both the blind person and the dog are taught to listen to the sounds of traffic. If they're at an intersection, and it's mainly the blind person that's making the decision, quite frankly, about crossing the street, they know that if the traffic is going the same way they're facing, in other words, the traffic's going this way and they're going this way, they can cross. They know if the traffic's going crosswise, they can't cross. But here's where the intelligent disobedience comes in. Because if the blind person gives the dog a command to go forward, and the dog hears or sees a car coming, the dog will move right in front of the person and stop them from going forward. Now, I have to tell you something else. We all like electric cars, right? One of the things about electric cars is they don't make any noise. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people are pushing for the lights to have sound. But fortunately, there's not all electric cars, so people can listen for the noise. I just want to briefly, before I shut up and let you just play with the dog, tell you that there's a lot of ways you can help. That Guide Dogs of America can only function with help from the public. Okay, you can be a puppy raiser, which to me is like the greatest thing in the world. You can also sponsor a puppy. If you look at Winter. Winter's got a collar that says sponsored by Susan Hoffman. Okay. What I did to get that collar was I sent them a check for $5,000. It became a puppy sponsor. If you're a puppy sponsor, you get to enjoy the dog without doing any of the work. Because the puppy raiser who has a sponsored dog, Sheila and Allison have to stay in touch with me, whether they want to or not, because the sponsor gets to follow the puppy's development. So for me, because the truth is I have 3 dogs at home right now, I can't raise another puppy. This is sort of the next best thing because I get to see them and play with them. There are also lots of other things you can sponsor. You can sponsor a litter. You can sponsor a harness, which is basically pay for blind person's harness. Those are sort of bigger chunks of money. Guide dogs needs donations of every kind and size. You know, if you get 100 people who give $2, that's a significant amount of money. They also need volunteers. One of the things I do now to get my puppy fix is I volunteer in the Head Start program 1 day a week so that I get to play with 7-week-old puppies. And there's all kinds of volunteer jobs. You can work in the office, work in publicity, help with photography. You know, any skill you have, if you're willing to contribute, it's needed. For most people, the easiest thing to do is write a check. And I hope that at least I know that you are all contributing something. I know that already. We really, really appreciate that. But if it ever comes to the end of the year and you're trying to think, well, which charity do I want to think about? We hope you'll think of Guide Dogs for America. Now, if you're not totally obsessed with the dogs, you can answer questions.
What traits in the dog's personalities are the ones that put them to be a service dog versus the dogs that done
Well, most of the dogs can be eyed because they're so well trained. But in general, the dogs that go on the service dog side are more social. They're the dogs that want to interact with other people. Because a guide dog can't stop and say hello to everybody they pass. Their job is not to make a social life for the blind person. Although quite honestly, most blind people live quite isolated lives. Because again, you don't walk up to the random blind person and start a conversation. So for them too, having the dog really makes their world more social. People go up to them and talk. But those dogs are only supposed to interact when they're given permission. The dogs on the service dog side, technically they have to be given permission too, but their job is more to help the person integrate into the world. So they get to be social more of the time. In some ways it's a slightly different personality, but most of the dogs could go either way. And sometimes they start a dog on one track, like they might go to the men's prison, or they might start it as a guide dog. And one of the instructors decides that the dog would be better in the other track. So sometimes dogs are moved. Many of the dogs are dropped because they don't like the work. And we always say they don't like the work as opposed to they can't do it, because there's no forcing them to do something they don't want to do. They have to want to do it. They have to love it. It's a career, just like some of us have careers, and we love them and we want to be good at them. So some people think, oh, poor service dog never gets to play, but they have a wonderful life and they're off duty a lot when they get to play.
By the way, Susan, we have 15 minutes. You can take questions all you want.
Okay, good.
Okay, so just take your time.
Are you hearing me okay?
And why specifically that?
That's a really good question. Right now, I say right now because the world is always changing. We have golden retrievers. We have labs. These are both pure labs, I think, eh? Oh, and then we have crosses. What's the makeup?
It's 50-50 Labrador and Golden Retriever.
For some reason, they tend to be the most successful, but the dogs that have crosses between golden retrievers and labs. We use those breeds because they work best. Guide Dogs of America used to use German Shepherds. And the German Shepherds were good, but they tend to bond to one person and not get along well with other people. Allison has raised one. And also, people out in the world are often afraid of German Shepherds, and so it's a little more awkward. They're more sensitive. We think of them as tougher, but they're actually more sensitive. We did do a little bit of a trial with standard poodles, and I don't know exactly what happened with that, but dropped fairly quickly. Yeah.
Protective are these dogs to their owner?
I wouldn't say they're protected. They're protected in the sense that they watch out for them, but there's no violence or aggression in these dogs at all. You can't do anything to make one of these dogs, growl or attack you.
And it's not part of the job. Security is not part of their job. They're not there to, scare people away.
They have to be able to get along. If a stranger does approach them without permission, they have to, know how to behave. They'll try not to engage, but they certainly wouldn't be aggressive. Yeah.
Two questions. Is it true that you can't teach an old dog these tricks?
No.
For humans.
Well, we'll come back to the thing you said that dogs are a little like humans in that there's a period in their lives when they learn things more quickly, but there's never a period, unless they get dementia, which dogs do, they can always learn. It might take them a little longer, just like it takes us a little longer to learn something new. But before I got involved in guide dogs in America, I always had rescue dogs that I got as adults. They can be trained. Yeah.
You're coming with it, you bring them to the hospital, does it see kids at the hospital, or you have?
It depends on the hospital. It's the hospital's rules. Often the hospitals prefer that you don't, just because the dog is not the most perfectly sanitary, clean thing in the world. But I do want to say that, half of these dogs get dropped, and they either go to a puppy raiser or they go to somebody out in the public. And a lot of us who have dogs that didn't make it train those dogs to be therapy dogs and take them to the hospital with the hospital's permission. The last puppy I raised, I just have to tell you quickly, was a golden retriever. And she was never cut out to be a service dog. She is very obedient, but she loves to play, and she's goofy, she's silly. And for the most part, the success rate with the golden retrievers is not as good as the success rate with the labs. We keep breeding them because the mixes are so successful. Some golden retrievers do make it, and they're particularly good with autistic kids, but they tend to be goofier, a little sillier, not quite as willing to work all the time. Yeah.
I had a question. For example, you're going to a supermarket. There's a sign, dogs are not allowed. Except,
I know it.
except service dogs.
Right.
I see an awful lot of people bringing dogs in. One of my questions is, in order to define a service dog, the service dogs have to have some distinguishing code or something on them, because I see people, putting dogs in baskets, and they're not serviceable. And they don't, in my opinion, they don't belong in supermarkets and delicatessens where you're handling food. But service dogs, I can understand. How do you? I ask somebody, is that a service dog? And it's obviously not a service dog, and they'll say yes. Is there a law that says or defines how a service dog is a service dog?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to answer that question. There's a law that says a service dog is a dog that is specially trained to help a person with a disability, and the dog is trained to help with that specific disability. So, a guide dog is trained to help a blind person. Now, the problem is that there is no formal certification or licensing or anything like that. Okay. And the problem is that California in particular is very protective of people with disabilities, so that the store owner is not allowed to ask, why do you have that service dog? the store owner or the restaurant owner is allowed to ask, is that dog trained to help with the disability? And what does the dog do? I think they're not allowed to ask what your disability is. So there is a ton of abuse. And it is against the law in California to say your dog is a service dog if it's not. But it's a source of a lot of frustration for the grocery stores, because that if the owners question somebody, it's so easy to run afoul of these laws about what you're allowed to ask and what you're not allowed to ask. Because, you know, if it really is a real service dog and they start questioning the person, then they get in all kinds of
But my
trouble.
question is, shouldn't, if it is a service dog, I don't have a problem with service dogs, but shouldn't a service dog be required to have a defining a code or something on it like this? It's got a yellow coat.
Yeah, once upon a time they were, but people with disabilities often don't want to attract attention to the fact that they have a disability. So this is the balancing act between, you know, the public in general and the rights of people with disabilities.
So in other words, what you're saying is a service dog would be a service dog, but it wouldn't be defined as such.
Well, if he's a service dog, it's like going to a doctor. You know, you don't wear a sign that says you're a doctor, because it against the law to say you're a doctor if you're not. A lot of people do put jackets on their dogs. These dogs in California, it's really a little fuzzy about whether they have the same rights as a fully trained service dog. The law says that if they're with a trainer, they have the rights of a fully trained service dog. And puppy raisers aren't exactly trainers. For the most part, people in LA are used to seeing these dogs in their yellow vests, because most of us, we raise several dogs and we live in the same neighborhood. And the places I go, they know I raise service dogs. They know the dogs are going to be well behaved. And I think we all find we can take the dogs where we want without lying about them. When I have one of these dogs, I find the thing that works best for me is I say, the dog belongs to Guide Dogs of America, and I'm helping to socialize it, which is the absolute truth. But that's more comforting to a store owner than me saying, oh, it's a service dog, but I'm not going to explain why.
Thank you.
It's a big problem.
I remember my second question. An emotional support dog. Is that a real service animal? It goes right in with
No.
So-
An emotional support animal does not have to be specifically trained to do anything. To have an emotional support animal, you just have to have a mental health professional say that the dog is helpful to you to go out and navigate in the world. As a practical matter, having an emotional support animal doesn't give you any rights any different than having a pet, other than that you have to be allowed to rent an apartment with an emotional support animal. It used to be you could take them on planes, but that was so abused that now it's up to the airlines to whether they will allow emotional support animals. That's something that's really abused because the dog doesn't have to be trained, so it's so easy to say. But it doesn't get you anything except maybe you don't have to pay your security deposit at the apartment. Or maybe you can live somewhere that otherwise couldn't take a dog. Allison, you were going to say something.
I have to follow up on what you're saying about people using that. I have a lot of opinions on it. But I do know up in British Columbia, the service dogs are given, they have to be certified. And the service dog handler has an identification, and I do think it would be helpful if there was some sort of program in the United States that had that, because so many people are using it. A lot of our clients are having real difficulties where a grocery store or a restaurant or an airline will just outright refuse them access, and especially Uber and Lyft. They are notorious for refusing to take service dog handlers in their vehicles, and yet there is no, the business, Uber does not punish the drivers in any way. And I know the person who got one of my dogs, she says at least 30 to 40% of the time, the driver would show up and just drive away.
It's a real problem with it, because we want to keep their car clean.
Yeah, and she does declare she has a dog, so it's not like they're showing up and the dog is a surprise. But, I think those two
Well, she's
questions,
blind, isn't she?
she's blind, the dog is in harness. They still will refuse her. I do think some sort of identification, if they could, like a driver's license almost, and not that the handler needs to go through it, but maybe the dog goes, I don't know. I'm not sure how, but I do think it would be helpful because I do think if when she visits at a disadvantage, I have a friend who's a restaurant owner, and she finds it incredibly challenging because she's a small business, and if she does refuse access, when it's clear the dog is not a service dog, one bad Yelp review is hugely impactful on her business. So she's allowing the dog, and she knows they're not service dog, and yet, she's really just going to offer a good place.
The guide dogs have a very specific harness, because they are the person that's visually impaired. And the service dogs from TDA, the recipients get a very specific purple vest that has the name of the organization on it, and it has a different kind of tab on the back. So they're very recognizable. You can look at it, you can see the organization. Anybody can buy a little vest with the service dog and that on it.
You can get them on Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and this is especially a problem for our veterans with PTSD, because these are people who already find the world traumatic. They've had horrible experiences, and then they try to go somewhere with a friend, like a movie or whatever, and all of a sudden they're challenged. And I think they're the ones that are particularly having trouble. Now, there are a lot of other kinds of service dogs that have the same problem, dogs that warn people about diabetic comas and heart problems and stuff. They all have that same problem, but it's just not our problem.
One other question.
Legislative review, we've got rules, laws.
There was actually a blind legislator who was terminated from the sidewalk. So there are people who are on it. It's just changing in New York.
The pendulum goes back and forth because people with disabilities are against, I mean, everybody's different, but there are a lot of people with disabilities who don't want to have to prove that there's something wrong with them. And the laws have changed, and they're different in different states, and it's a real balancing act. But I think in California in particular, I was at Ralph yesterday, and I saw people walking in with these little dogs. They didn't even have service jackets on.
By the way, everybody, let's give them a round of applause. And rather than our normal speaker gift from Westwood Village Friendly Rotary Club, we are presenting you a check to go hopefully to Helton's cause. And
Guaranteed.
okay, and please stay for a second because we want to take a photo.
Okay, and I do have some material to give out.
Okay, please pass it out if you want. And I'm ready. And I wanted to let everybody know next week's program. Bring your iPhone or Google phone, because a very, very close friend of mine who's a professional photographer is coming. The subject will be, what do we see? Okay. We have a camera, but we're not looking beyond the photo. So he's going to talk about everyday photography on how to have a different perspective. Okay. And the final quote of the day, and I've been saving this for a few weeks. You have brains in your head. You have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own, and you know what you know. And you are the guy who'll decide where to go. And that's by Dr. Seuss. And with that, we are adjourning the meeting. Oh, here we go. How about that? Was that fun? Okay, Peter, can you take a photo with me and the dog?